This story is a work of fiction, inspired by real events. Names, dates, locations, and identifying details have been changed or dramatized to protect privacy and enhance the narrative. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental or used fictitiously. This content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. It does not aim to glorify crime, promote violence, or pass judgment on real individuals. Viewer discretion is advised. Some scenes may contain mature, disturbing, or triggering content. What you are about to watch could have happened anywhere, to anyone. It's inspired by real events. Whispers of truth, buried beneath layers of fiction. We've changed the names, the dates, the locations, but the emotions, the betrayal, the fear, those are real. This story is not meant to accuse, only to reveal, to make you question, who do you really trust? If stories like this keep you thinking, long after they end, hit subscribe, smash like, and drop your theory in the comments. Now watch closely, before the truth disappears again.
Clara James loved the small rituals. Saturday mornings meant coffee brewed strong, a splash of hazelnut creamer, and an old country playlist humming low through the kitchen. She would sing along, sometimes off-key, while flipping pancakes barefoot on the cool tile. To anyone else, it was ordinary. To Clara, it was proof she had built her own pocket of peace. Her laugh was the kind people remembered. Sharp, sudden, contagious. A neighbor once said you could hear it from the driveway and know instantly she was home. Her sister remembered how Clara always tapped her coffee cup twice before sipping, a silly habit she never explained but never broke. These were the fingerprints of her life, small, vivid, hers alone. There's a photograph that captures her best, hair loose, head tilted back, her niece in her arms, frosting smudged across her fingers as she laughed like nothing could touch her. That was Clara, unguarded, alive, believing that tomorrow still held something good. And she wanted more than just good. After years of disappointment, Clara longed for love that would last, for someone who would promise her stability and keep it. She believed second chances were worth the risk. That hope would lead her to Richard Hale, a man who looked like everything she had prayed for, but carried secrets big enough to crush her world. Because trust, once broken, doesn't just vanish. It shatters. And when it does, the silence it leaves behind can be unbearable. How did Clara's laughter, her rituals, her faith in new beginnings, lead her straight into the arms of the man who would betray it all? Clara James had spent years trying to hold her marriage together. But love that once promised forever had withered into arguments and long silences. By the time she walked away, it wasn't a scandal, it was survival. She started over in a modest brick house on a quiet Houston street. She filled it with bright throws and family photos, as if color itself could drive away the loneliness. She planted roses in the yard even though Texas heat scorched them year after year. To her, each stubborn bloom was proof that something fragile could still survive. Outwardly, Clara was moving forward. She signed up for salsa classes, she reconnected with friends, she tried to laugh as freely as she used to. But inside, there was an ache she couldn't quite silence. Nights were long, the bills were heavy, and the thought of growing old alone pressed on her more than she admitted. Clara didn't just want freedom. She wanted someone who would make her feel safe again. That's when Richard Hale appeared. 62, silver hair swept back, his confidence filling the room before he spoke. He wasn't just polished, he was practiced. He ordered for her at restaurants without hesitation, dropped names of oil towns like Midland and Odessa, and carried himself as if the ground shifted for him. To Clara, he looked like everything she had been missing: protection, stability, a chance at lasting devotion. Her friends noticed the change in her voice when she spoke his name. She glowed again, convinced she had finally found someone who saw her, cherished her, and would never let her fall. But Richard's world was more performance than promise. The wealth, the stories, the charm, all carefully staged. And while Clara leaned into the dream, the cracks were already showing beneath his polished surface. For Clara James, life with Richard Hale felt like stepping into a storybook written just for her. Nights that had once been quiet and heavy were suddenly filled with noise, lights, and movement. He whisked her away in a black Mercedes, the engine purring like it belonged only to men who had mastered success. Houston's skyline blurred behind them, and for the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to feel chosen. Richard had a way of making even the smallest act seem grand. He ordered at restaurants without looking at the menu, snapping his fingers at waiters as if he owned the place. He talked about oil fields near Midland and land outside San Antonio, rolling the names off his tongue like rehearsed lines from a play. And when he spoke, his hands betrayed him, always adjusting the cufflinks at his wrists, a habit Clara would later learn appeared every time he bent the truth. She soaked it in. The champagne toasts. The polished cars. The glow of being seen on his arm. On her phone, the texts kept coming, good mornings before dawn, promises of weekends on the ranch, pictures of him in suits, captions about how lucky they were. Clara's friends noticed her online glow. The woman who once hid behind caution was smiling again, showing the world she had found her second chance. But illusions, no matter how bright, carry shadows. A check that bounced, dismissed as a clerical error. A cancelled trip, brushed off as business emergencies. A card declined, followed by Richard's easy laugh and a too smooth excuse. Clara felt the sting but swallowed it. She told herself even billionaires had bad days. She told herself she had already sacrificed too much to doubt now. Still, unease followed her. A hushed phone call cut short when she entered the room. His quick deflection when she asked about his past. The way his eyes darted when family was mentioned, as if the word itself was dangerous. The illusion was dazzling, and Clara wanted to believe it. Needed to believe it. But the cracks were spreading. And soon, the life Richard promised would collapse under the weight of the secrets he could no longer hide. Red flags don't always scream. Sometimes they whisper, soft enough to ignore if your heart wants to. Clara James noticed them, one by one. Richard Hale liked to order for her at restaurants, a habit she once found charming. But then she noticed he always chose the same two places, both mid-range, both cash only. He said he preferred the old-school atmosphere. At first, Clara believed him. Later, she wondered if it was because no one asked for his card. Another time, she found a crumpled receipt in his jacket. It wasn't for oil business or luxury dining. It was a child's shoe store, the purchase recent. When she asked, Richard brushed it off. A gift for a friend's kid. His cufflinks twisted between his fingers as he said it. Her friends kept pressing. Had she ever seen an office? A deed? A single oil well? Clara bristled at the questions. She told them they didn't understand him, that success like Richard's didn't follow normal rules. But when she lay awake at night, staring at her ceiling, she felt the gnaw of doubt. What held her wasn't blindness, it was fear. Fear of admitting she had left her marriage for another lie. Fear of being the woman who trusted too easily. Fear that, at her age, there might not be another chance. So Clara swallowed her doubts. She laughed at Richard's excuses. She told herself love demanded patience. But denial can only carry so much weight. Every lie he told rested on her shoulders, pressing harder each day. And soon, one truth would land heavy enough to break her. Clara James hadn't planned on becoming a detective. But once doubt took root, she couldn't stop. The man she thought was her future had become a mystery she needed to solve. The first clue wasn't dramatic. It was a letter she pulled from the mail, not in bold red ink, but thin, impersonal type, notice of repossession. The property listed wasn't some stranger's. It was the very ranch Richard bragged about outside San Antonio. Clara read the address twice, her stomach tightening. He had taken her there in conversation a dozen times, described it down to the oak trees. But on paper, it was gone years ago. That night, while Richard showered, Clara opened his briefcase. Inside was a jumble of receipts. Restaurants she had never been to, dry cleaning in another woman's name, and a handwritten IOU for $10,000. She searched for patterns but only found noise. One receipt, though, made her freeze, a toy store in Dallas. Clara had never seen Richard with children. When she asked later, he laughed, a gift for a friend's kid. His cufflinks twisted between his fingers. The laptop told more. The oil companies he flaunted didn't appear in state business filings. Their websites looked polished but empty, like shells built to fool. Clara dug deeper, clicking through layers of links that led nowhere. What she did find were payments, steady, monthly, to 6 different households. Rent. School fees. Medical bills. Each tied to a child with his last name. 6 children. 6 lives. All hidden from her. Clara sat at the kitchen table until dawn, her body rigid, hands trembling. She felt sick. The pages around her didn't read like business, they read like evidence. Each bill was another crack, each receipt another lie. The life Richard promised her wasn't a fortune. It was a performance stitched together with debts, secrets, and omissions. Her chest burned with betrayal. Anger mixed with shame. She wanted to cry but couldn't. She had left a marriage, gambled on trust, and been pulled into something darker. And across the hall, Richard Hale slept soundly, unaware that Clara James had finally seen him for what he was. Richard Hale had built his life on control. Every suit pressed, every story polished, every smile rehearsed. But Clara James no longer saw the billionaire he pretended to be. She saw the man behind it, brittle, cornered, afraid. The first confrontation came at the kitchen table. Clara slid the repossession notice across the wood. Richard picked it up, scanned it, and forced a laugh. "Paperwork," he said. But his hand betrayed him, tapping the corner of the page again and again, faster with each second. Then came the receipts. Clara spread them out, toy stores, rent checks, school fees. His cufflinks slipped in his fingers, a nervous tick she recognized now as a tell. His voice rose. "You've been snooping. You should be grateful for what I give you." Clara's heart pounded, not with fear but fury. She had left her marriage for this man, defended him to friends, built her hopes on his promises. Now all she saw was a liar, scrambling. She wanted to scream, but instead she held his gaze and let the silence choke him. Outside their home, the whispers had already started. Neighbors mentioned seeing him slip into town late at night. Old business partners called Clara, warning her they too had been burned. And the lawyers were circling, fraud claims resurfacing, shell companies collapsing, investigators taking notice. Richard tried to keep the mask on, but each denial sounded thinner, more desperate. His charm no longer filled the room. It leaked out like air from a punctured tire, leaving only a man who couldn't stop fidgeting with his sleeves, who couldn't look her in the eye. Clara realized then she was no longer his victim. She was his witness. And soon, Richard Hale would face more than her questions, he would face a courtroom ready to strip the last mask away. The courtroom felt heavier than air. Every bench was filled, neighbors leaning forward, reporters scribbling, strangers hungry for spectacle. At the front sat Clara James, spine straight, hands clenched so tightly her knuckles whitened. Across from her, Richard Hale shifted in his chair. His suit was pressed, his hair silver and neat, but his body betrayed him. He tapped one shoe against the floor in a steady, nervous rhythm. His cufflinks spun in his fingers as though he could twist his way back into control. The prosecutor began with precision. Not broad accusations, but paper. A repossession notice. A foreclosure. Business records from companies with no employees, no assets, no wells. Each exhibit was slid across to the jury, each one another nail hammered into Richard's myth. Clara kept her eyes down, but she heard the murmurs spread across the room. Then the receipts came. School fees. Medical bills. Rent checks, all paid out to households Richard never acknowledged. The prosecutor read the names aloud, one after another, until 6 children stood like ghosts in the silence. Richard flinched at the mention of his own last name on documents he had sworn didn't exist. Clara's chest tightened, she bit the inside of her cheek until it bled, determined not to let him see her break. The defense struck back with practiced fire. They claimed Richard was a victim of circumstance, oil markets collapsing, investments souring. They called the payments acts of generosity, not deception. When their voice rose, they turned to Clara, painting her as bitter, a woman angry at a failed romance. Richard nodded as his lawyer spoke, lips curling into a faint smirk, as if even here he believed charm could outlast fact. But facts kept landing. A former partner described empty promises and unpaid debts. An estranged daughter's voice trembled as she told the jury she knew her father only by the checks he mailed, never by presents. And finally, a financial investigator walked through Richard's account step by step, showing how borrowed money built the illusion of fortune until nothing was left but debt. Richard grew restless. He whispered to his lawyer, shook his head, glared across the room. When the investigator's testimony ended, he slammed his pen down hard enough for the sound to echo. For the first time, the mask slipped fully, and the jury saw not a billionaire but a man cornered. The defense's final plea was desperation. Failure is not fraud, they told the jury. Ambition is not a crime. But the prosecutor's closing words cut through the noise. Richard Hale sold lies as love. He didn't just steal money. He stole trust. And he left Clara James to pay the price. When the jury filed out, the room fell into a silence more suffocating than the noise that came before. Clara gripped the bench until her nails dug into the wood. She knew the verdict would decide more than Richard's future. It would decide whether her own nightmare finally ended, or whether his shadow would follow her still. The jury filed back in, faces set, eyes fixed straight ahead. Clara James held her breath. She had waited for weeks, but the moment still felt unreal. Across the aisle, Richard Hale sat rigid, his cufflinks absent, his hands bare for the first time. The foreman stood. The courtroom hushed. The words were clear, steady, and final, guilty. Clara exhaled, the air leaving her like a weight pulled from her chest. Around her, whispers rippled, some in shock, some in relief. Richard didn't flinch. He stared forward, jaw clenched, the mask gone. For once, he had no story to tell. The judge delivered the sentence, years behind bars, restitution demanded, his empire reduced to numbers and losses. But sentences don't measure betrayal. They don't account for the nights Clara lay awake believing in lies, or the humiliation of defending a man who never existed. Justice, in its way, was served. But scars remain long after verdicts are read. Clara walked out of the courthouse into the Texas heat. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted her name, but she barely heard them. She felt hollow, emptied, yet free. She had survived Richard's performance, but survival came at a cost, trust itself felt broken, fragile in her hands. The community reflected too. Neighbors who once envied her fairy tale now saw how thin charm could be. Friends who had doubted Richard felt vindicated, but also shaken. How many others like him walked among them, wearing masks, feeding on hope? Richard Hale's empire had been smoke from the beginning. Paper companies. False promises. Children hidden in silence. And Clara James, chasing love, had stepped straight into his illusion. In the end, the courtroom didn't just hear the jury's voice. It heard hers, in every document, every witness, every truth dragged into the light. Clara James's story is a warning, trust can be the most dangerous currency of all. And if stories like hers must be remembered, not buried, then join us. Subscribe, share, and stay with us as we uncover more truths hidden in the shadows. Because the next betrayal, the next deception, might be closer than you think.